I'd like to welcome David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I will be focusing on three main resources that I have not seen a lot of strategies or suggestions related to on the internet. So I hope that you'll find this useful. Now, the handout that you have in front of you, this will probably be most useful if you have not determined whether an ancestor has served in the Civil War. That's on the first page. And then second page, there are some details regarding using the National Archives, and then some specific items to consider if you're working on Google Books. We'll be going over this in detail with the PowerPoint, just to tell you what's in the handout, and then a list of lots and lots of bullet points, things to consider if you are interested in a more thorough search. Part of my background, I'll just tell this, is I spent about 11 years documenting 76 Iowa residents who left our state and served the Confederacy during the Civil War, as inexplicable as that might sound. I was determined to, I needed to document Iowa residency for 2 years before the Civil War. I also needed to document Confederate service. Otherwise, I couldn't present somebody as being an Iowa Confederate. A guiding principle that I have had in my research is verify, verify. For example, if Grandma said, you know, somebody served the Confederacy, and if I discovered actually that person served the Union, then I believe a guiding principle for me is it is just as important to prove that something isn't correct as to prove that it is. So I'm driven by accuracy, and my general rule of thumb is before I ever say that something is a fact, I always look for at least 2 pieces of evidence, corroborating evidence, or one piece with really solid reasoning that is airtight, that is completely unassailable, before I say something is accurate, something is true. If you don't have that, you're free. I'm free to say, well, the family story says, or the rumor says, or one person said this. That's okay. That's just a little bit of my background. So in the process of searching for details about 76 men, I found enough details to be able to give a short biographical sketch of each of these men and a few others that were representative, to actually put it into a story form. And that involved a lot more research. I'm telling you this just to kind of establish some of my bona fides that I've encountered roadblocks and frustrations, and I hope to give tips that would allow you to avoid some of the roadblocks that I encountered. So, with all of that as introduction, why don't we, most of this will be involving the PowerPoint, and I'll be talking through the PowerPoint. I invite you to take notes. Before we talk about specifically using the 3 sources that I will address today, if you are one of the people who you don't know whether you have an ancestor that served in the Civil War, I'd like to go through on the handout the first page. and just, we'll talk you through it, then we'll get to the PowerPoint. So if you already know, you're already squared away, you might even know the unit that someone served in. That's good. Please just be patient for a few minutes. So, if you're looking to see whether an ancestor served in the Civil War, I would suggest that you set yourself 5 goals. The first goal is names and nicknames of the ancestor. So you may need to distinguish between 2 or more people who have the same or a similar name. You also might need to allow for little quirky spellings, some differences in spellings. Secondly, a goal of establishing the date of birth and the location of birth. For a Civil War ancestor, the time range is probably between 1820 and 1845 for birth. If an ancestor of yours emigrated from another country, it's really helpful to establish, to document the year that that person arrived and the name and the name of the city and the state that he moved to. Of course, it's always helpful to write down names of family members who made the trip across the pond, if that's what happened. And then family members, parents, siblings, uncles, and spouses. And then number 4, where he lived and the dates. Lastly, date of death and location. So those are just 5 overarching goals. But then getting down to specifics. First of all, I would suggest looking at family records. It could be photos, letters, diaries, memorabilia, and then I would encourage you to ask around in the family, does anybody know about this ancestor? There can be some latent knowledge or family stories floating around that you might not know about, but somebody else does. And those could be useful clues to help you in your search. And then B, find his obituary. This could be his, that mentions his Civil War service, or perhaps it could be information from a fraternal organization like the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR. And sources for these could be Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, both subscription services, FamilySearch.org. It's FamilySearch.org, you probably know, is run as in some type of affiliation with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They do great work, and I have not yet had to pay a dime for using their services. It's really a fine site. Google search and county or local historical society in the last known residence. So if one of your ancestors, the last known residence was in Greene County, you're in luck, because you know where to turn to try and find details about where he lived, his last residence. And then C, look at a tombstone. Find a Grave is a very nice resource. And then D, the 1910 Federal Census, column 30, way off to the right. If you look at column 30, that identified a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy. And if that box is checked, all of a sudden, if you're looking at the right person, you have something, a more credible source to go on. It's definitely a useful, good sign. Then Ancestry.com or newspapers.com. Yes?
The library has the purpose subscription.
Oh, that's great. That's great. By the way, since this is kind of a workshop, if you have a question or a comment that occurs to you as we're going through, please raise your hand or get my attention, and we can talk about it as we go. Yes?
Now, one thing I want to point out is with the census, we have Greene County Census here for 1895, 1925. Both of them asked about their military service.
Okay.
And 25 asked about Civil War. So
Yes, yes, very good, thank you. Anybody else? I thought I saw maybe another hand. Okay, well let's begin with the PowerPoint. Okay, first off, with fold3.com, if you, and now we're entering the period, the part of the presentation, that if you know that an ancestor, or you believe that an ancestor served the Confederacy during the Civil War, fold3.com is the best single resource for you. It has digitized copy of the compiled Confederate service records held in the National Archives. It also has digitized copies of letters that Confederate civilians wrote during the Civil War. There are records pertinent to Confederate officers, and so forth. It is just a terrific source. Now, it is a subscription service, but I'd like to highlight there's a free 7-day trial. Thereafter, annual subscription costs about $79 or $80 a year. Sometimes they have sales of $49.95 a year. It's a great source. One neat thing about fold3.com is if you see an image of a document, say a Confederate service record, then you can always just download a copy on your computer, so you have it. All right, now as I was mentioning, Confederate records for enlisted men, officers, and also miscellaneous. There are some really interesting things that can show up in fold3.com. Also, it contains Confederate amnesty papers. Many Confederates applied for amnesty so that they could actually vote after the Civil War ended. And then Southern claims post-war that were approved or that were just sought, seeking reimbursement from the federal government. Should we go on to the next screen? All right, on fold3.com, first thing that I suggest that you do is you click on Browse. Now, on the left, your screen would look like this. Filter publications by conflict or war. So Civil War Confederate, that's a good thing to do. Click on that, so Civil War Confederate. And then you have a list of different publications under Civil War Confederate. I typed in the name of George Laswell, who I believe was a Confederate from Iowa. Clicked on the search box, and oh, bing, ding, ding, George Laswell, Confederate. So I would click on this, what I have circled, and this is the first item that appears, this first record, this digitized copy of what's in the National Archives. On this card, what I've circled is his name, George S. Laswell, but you can see that the regiment he was in, the 1st Mounted Rifles, Arkansas, the company, his rank of captain and then colonel, and it lists card numbers, so there's something in that file. Fold3 shows you little tiny images of the next several pictures in his file, of documents in his file. So let's go on and see what's next. This is another card from his file, and it says, Captain Laswell's company, Churchill's Mounted Rifle Regiment, Arkansas Volunteers. This is a great card because if you look closely, you'll notice in the upper left, it says Captain, age 24 years, and it listed joined for duty, and he enrolled, the date of enrollment, date of joining, where, Fort Smith, by whom, Captain Laswell. Apparently he enlisted himself for a period of 12 months. Then if you keep looking for details, he traveled 127 miles to get to his place of rendezvous. And then he had with him a horse that was valued at $140 and horse equipment worth $20. So these are all discrete little facts, but I don't know if you would have this in mind, if this would be your goal, but if you hope to someday be able to tell a story about your Civil War ancestor, some of these details might help you tell a story. It might just, or at least help you learn enough to get to where you could tell a story. Let's go to the next screen. All right, under George Laswell, you'll notice that some of these things in the file look like letters. And by golly, this one was a letter to President Jefferson Davis. So that alone it got my attention. This former Iowa resident writing to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And in it, even better for me, he explained what happened when he lived in Iowa and his situation financially and so forth. He gave lots of details. If you find a letter on fold3.com of your Confederate ancestor, it might be interesting. It might tell you something that you had no idea about, you didn't know. Okay, now, that was in the Civil War service records, but he also had information in miscellaneous Confederate records, miscellaneous. I just wanted to show you what that might look like. This is a different form, a totally different form. This is for special requisitions from the Quartermaster's Department. For example, 1862, for one good saddle horse. And he signed it and dated it, September 11th, 1862. So with miscellaneous Confederate records, you get into things like quartermaster records, or records of pay, or so forth. Just miscellaneous things. Now I want to show you a roadblock. That was a successful search. Yay! But then we had some frustration, a real head scratcher. I had believed that the eldest son of Iowa's second governor, Stephen Hempstead, that his son, Junius, was a Confederate officer. So I wanted to find his records. Should be easy, right? So I typed in the search box, Junius L. Hempstead, and Civil War Index from Virginia. Type in Junius, and no results found. Nothing. A real head scratcher. So under Hempstead, I just tried the name Hempstead and found J.T. Hempstead. Okay, it wasn't J.L. for Junius L. Hempstead, J.T. Close enough, right? So click on Hempstead, J.T. and let me back up here a second. Okay. Hempstead, J.T. It says Hempstead, J.L. filed under Hempstead, James L. So we started out with Hempstead, now we're to Hempstead, J.L.? That's not the right name, but that's what's on the card. So I typed in Hempstead, James L., and his name was Junius, not James. Was it the same guy? Decided to find out. Hempstead, James L. No results found. Darn it. But in the lower left-hand corner, branch, Confederate Army, one result. One result. For Hempstead, James L., 1 result. So, I clicked on it. And I got, browse the collections, Hempstead, James L., 1 page, and it showed a document. So, I clicked on that. Can you see where we're following the breadcrumbs? And this showed up on my screen. It says, Hempstead, it's another misspelling, 25th Virginia Infantry, file number Hempstead James L. But it says 25th Virginia Infantry. Okay. So I thought, okay, let's try to search through the number of the regiment number. That's another way you can get in to the, is everybody following me on this? Get in through the regiment number. So, we went to Civil War Confederate, Civil War Service Records, Civil War Service Records for Virginia, under Virginia, the 25th Infantry Hex Regiment, and then names with the letter H, like Hempstead. So 25th Infantry Hex Regiment H, Hempstead, James L. At least it shows up on the list, right? Let's click on it and see what happens. Lo and behold, 54 of these. 54 documents. But is it the same guy? By golly, it is. And at least one of them was a letter to President Jefferson Davis. Inside, let's see. Now, I can't show you this here, I don't have the screen, but somebody misread what a clerk in the War Department, the Confederate War Department had written, or actually would have been probably a copyist at Washington, D.C., had misread what the copyist had written down. It did say Hempstead, but somebody read it as Hempstead. And that's what went into, that was the source of the confusion, either from the copyist or from somebody at the National Archives. But anyway, this letter to President Jefferson Davis. Probably, if your ancestor, if the file has a letter to President Jefferson Davis, chances are that person was asking for an appointment or wanting to be shifted to another unit, another branch of the military, or wanted to be promoted. That's often what these letters consisted of. And he told about his family in Iowa. So, bing, ding, ding, we got confirmation. This is the same guy, this is the correct guy. So when you're using fold 3, 3 main tips. Try different spellings. Sometimes the spelling is kind of creative, shall we say. Or that's what somebody read, is a creative take on it. Then, try searching a specific regiment. If you can't get in through the names, try searching a specific regiment. And then, be persistent. I wanted to throw up my hands in frustration several times, just searching for Mr. Hempstead. But it was worth it in the end. Do you have any questions about using fold3.com? Yes?
Is Fold 3 only for Confederates?
That's a great question. Now, Fold 3 also has limited Union records. Let me back up a second here. Before we talk about what's on Fold 3, I just want to say, in general, the Union records, we will talk more about this regarding the National Archives, but Union records, overall, not particularly on Fold 3, but in general, Union records consist of a pensions index, applying for pensions, widows' pensions, Civil War service index by state, a Union, actually all of these are in Fold 3, Union citizens file, and Civil War subversion investigations. So I want to talk about each of these things in order, what they mean. What's on fold 3? Now the pensions index, quite simply it usually means one card. My great-great-grandfather was an assistant surgeon in an Illinois regiment. On fold3.com, I typed in his name. I found one card that says, yes, he applied for a pension. That's all it said, one card. Which meant, okay, I'm going to have to contact the National Archives. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But it's a good clue that he applied for a pension. It also contains, I believe, one card, probably one card for widows' pensions. It also has generally one card that says the Civil War service of the ancestor that lists the name of a regiment. Now, a few years ago, Fold 3 announced that they were starting to slowly microfilm or make digital copies of Union service records and have them available on fold3.com. But it's a very, very small amount of Union service records available with page after page after page of information. Very little is available through fold3.com. But there's a little bit. Then you come to Union Citizens File. Well, in Iowa, things were pretty hot. In the state of Iowa, pretty emotional during the Civil War, and understandably so. Nearly everybody was on edge over fear. Is my loved one, my brother, son, father, uncle, cousin, neighbor, in harm's way? Are they going to be okay? So there's a lot of emotional investment and awareness of the war. But then you mix into that, there were Democrats, many of them, as the war went on, they weren't so keen about having the bloodshed continue. It was a really bad time to be a peace Democrat if you told anybody about it, because many Iowans were criticized, smeared publicly. Sometimes Iowans who criticized the war effort or President Lincoln were arrested and thrown into prison. No charges filed. So letters concerning these rumors or these accusations or these actions sometimes show up in the Union Citizens File. Somebody saying, hey, Joe down the street, he's disloyal. Do something about it. I think he's a threat. I think he's a danger. And Joe might find himself arrested and tossed in prison. Some of that shows up in the Union Citizens File. And then Civil War subversion investigations are somewhat related to that, but not so much regarding Iowa. Okay, let's go back to browse. Under Civil War Union, that's the portal, that's the entryway to start finding Union records on fold3.com. Regarding Civil War Pensions Index, Civil War Union, filter publication list, Civil War Pensions Index. My great-great-grandfather was from Illinois, so I clicked on Illinois. And infantry, he was in an infantry regiment. Typed in his name, Wesley Phillips, and it says no results found. But you have to be be persistent. Look for every clue that shows up on the page. Conflict, civil conflict, war, other service, one result. Let's click on it and see where it goes. Boom, Wesley Phillips, Civil War Pensions Index. FNS 112 Infantry. And it looks like this. Wesley Phillips. FNS 112 Illinois Infantry. Told his application number. So now I know that there's something in the National Archives my great-great-grandfather's pension application. Now regarding Civil War service, just an index by state, Civil War Union, Civil War Index, Union, Illinois, and when I typed in Wesley Phillips, Civil War Service Index, and it looked like this. Pretty much a blank card. Wesley Phillips, 112th Illinois Infantry, 2nd Assistant Surgeon, Assistant Surgeon. That's it. If you use fold3.com to look for a Union ancestor, that might be all that you find, okay? But it's just the reminder, okay? Next step is National Archives. Any questions about Fold3 before we move on to the National Archives? National Archives. If you type National Archives on the internet, you should get a screen that looks like this. Left side, research our records. This is the easiest, the most intuitive way to get to what you're looking for. So click on it, and then on the page, Veteran Service Records, request military service records. And then it says locations of service records. The next screen says older, pre-World War I service records. That's where you want to click. And then you have this screen, military service records and military pension / bounty land warrant applications. Something I put on page 2 of your handout is, this deals with check National Archives for Union records. The National Archives gives this advice. The National Archives recommends, first, request copies of a soldier's pension file. That's actually good advice. They say the pension application files contain the most complete information. And that's what a lot of us are looking for, the most complete information. But it's pricey. It does cost $80 for up to 100 pages and 70 cents per additional page. You can order online. Let's go to the next screen here. So if you click on military pension, I've listed here full pension file, $80, or you could, if you just don't want to spend $80 for this, there's a smaller version. For $30, you can get a pension documents packet for up to 8 documents. It's kind of a crapshoot, if I can use those words. You don't know what you're going to find in 8 pages. You might find some nuggets. Who knows? Now, what is contained? What is contained in a pension application? Declaration of pension, declaration of widow's pension, adjutant general's statements of service, questionnaires completed by the applicant. Now this is a rich source. If you have your ancestor say, this is what I did in the Union service, this is what I'm doing now, this is why I need a pension from Uncle Sam, all of a sudden, you probably will find information that you didn't know about before. Then, pension drop cards, marriage certificates, death certificates, discharge certificates. I can't say that every pension application is rich in details, but there's always the possibility that it contains details that you likely would find nowhere else, or at least at least it can help substantiate something else you have learned. Do you have any questions so far about this? Sir?
How old did they have to be to get a pension?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. Does anybody have any insight on this?
From Wisconsin, I do. My husband's great-grandfather went in as a drummer boy,
Uh-huh.
and he was in for about 8 months, and his wife was able to get the pension.
How old, so she got the pension after he died?
Yeah,
You know how old he was when he died?
I don't. I may have it in some of our family archives.
So she got the pension?
Mhm.
Okay. That's a great question, sir. I'll have to look into it. I don't know.
If they died young, then they wouldn't have applied for a pension.
That's right. That's right.
They would be in there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Very, very true. Sir?
Yeah, my great uncle was down south and stuff, and he was really sick from his injuries in the war. And as he was coming up, he died on the steamship that he was on, coming back to Iowa. And he had applied for his pension before he died. They still had some of his information on pension stuff from when he applied for it.
Really? Wow. By the way, I almost feel like I should apologize for this. This is a detail-rich presentation I'm giving here. Just a flood of details. A flood. I don't know how you can avoid it. Should we go to the next screen? Yes.
Would a soldier apply for a pension because he was poor or old, or just because he served?
Because he served.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on. This is a photocopy of, for my dad. I got my great-great-grandfathers, I had 2 great-great-grandfathers that served in the Union Army. They both applied for pensions. One of them was successful, one of them was not granted a pension. Well, the one that was, the assistant surgeon, they sent me, I asked for pages, photocopies. So paid my $80. And one of the forms was a declaration for the increase of an invalid pension. So wanted some more money from the federal government. He had explained why. Why do you think you're entitled to this? What are the circumstances? Why do you believe you're yourself entitled to this? And what is your disability and so forth? My great-great-grandfather went before some legal authority, legally recognized person, and wrote his initial deposition or application for a pension. I don't know what exactly the qualifications were. I think my guess is if you were disabled, unable to work, or if you had lingering health conditions, especially if they resulted from the war, especially, those are pretty darn solid grounds for getting granted a pension. And of course, just union service in particular. But I don't know the answers to that. Those are great questions. Anybody else? Now you can order this pension file and or pension documents packet online. So I don't know if everybody's comfortable doing this online. It can seem a little daunting, but if you take your time, I found it to be doable. You can order the complete pension application for $80. And by the way, you can get up to 100 pages from the pension application file. It's possible that someone's pension application file is bigger than that, and then you'd have to pay 70 cents per additional page. But there could be a lot of information in that. On the other hand, I found with my ancestor who applied for a pension and was denied, there were lots of repeats. He kept repeating himself over and over and asking, can I get a pension now? Can I get a pension now? Here's what happened. Here's what happened. Can somebody help me? And thumbs down every time. Down here, federal military pension applications, the pension documents packet, the smaller 8-page version, $30. You could also, on Form 85, if you wanted to download it, print it off, it would look like this. This Form 85. And I believe I mentioned that in the handout. Now, you can also search for, the National Archives, search for Union Army service records. So under Veteran Service Records, find locations of service records, older pre-World War I service records, click on it. And this is what it details about it. Union Army military service records, $30. May include the date of enlistment, muster rolls, when they showed up for roll call in the service, illnesses, capture as a prisoner of war, promotions or demotions, desertion, death, mustering out date and location. By the way, just an aside, Ella Lon, who wrote, a scholar, wrote, I believe in the 1930s, she wrote a great book on desertion. She said that approximately 1 out of every 7 Union soldiers deserted at one point during his service. And 1 out of every 9 Confederates did so. So, desertion might actually show up in someone's research. It's possible, statistically speaking. The order form would look like this, Form 86. Let's go back one screen. This looks like this is a lot of possibly useful information, right? But it's not, it doesn't have the potential to be as rich as a pension application. If you really want an inside scoop, if you're looking for insights into your ancestor's experience during and after the war, I think for the money involved, the better bet I would recommend, if you can afford it, the pension application, not just the military service records. Any questions about going through the National Archives for your Union ancestors' pension application? Any questions or comments before we go to the last main topic? Okay. Lastly, Google Books. Believe it or not, this can be one heck of a resource. And I'd like to talk you through some strategies, some specific suggestions for maximizing time on Google Books. Before I say anything about that though, if you're anything like me or like a lot of us Iowans, the internet can be an endless series of rabbit holes. Endless. So, and it's almost designed to take any curiosity, any tendency towards distraction and take us places that we didn't really want to go and spend time we didn't really want to spend. So, I think, my suggestion is having a plan and having a little self-discipline is very useful. And in fact, here's a just free suggestion. If you start using Google Books to look for information about your Civil War ancestor, if you find something else that you think, hey, this might be interesting, keep a piece of paper next to the computer and just write it down. And then go back to it. You can look at it later, but just stick to your search. That's my suggestion. Right? Not to be a party spoiler, but that's my suggestion. Okay, Google Books. Now, let's take our old friend Junius L. Hempstead. You'll notice that I used quotation marks. That is my number one suggestion for using Google Books. Use quotation marks. If you don't, you might have so many hits that more than you ever want to see, of unrelated stuff. So, Junius L. Hempstead, clicked on it, and lo and behold, brain rambles, Confederate military history, a library of Confederate. So, I clicked on Confederate military history, a library of Confederate, and I got this. It talks about Captain Junius L. Hempstead of New Orleans, born in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, in 1846. That's an error. He was born in Dubuque, Iowa. Just because it's in a book, just because it's on Google Books or on the internet, it's not gospel. It is not. People made mistakes then, people can make mistakes now. By the way, just as an aside, I recommend, if I can be so bold, I recommend that you approach Ancestry.com with caution. Some good-meaning people, well-meaning people, and you probably know this, can put things, list things in genealogical family histories, family trees, whatever, that just are not correct, or it's the same name but a different person and they don't know it. You might think, hey, this sounds kind of funny, this doesn't add up. Well, if you get that feeling, keep at it, and you might find out, yeah, it doesn't add up. I'm not trying to bash Ancestry.com. It has its place, but just be cautious. Who was the great president who said, trust but verify? Ronald Reagan? I think that applies to Ancestry.com. Okay, so keep an eye out for verifying the information. And then, to help you take off on the runway of Google Books, this is very important. Up at the top, you'll see any view, any document, any time. If you're talking about a Civil War ancestor, I highly recommend that you start with the 19th century and then click on 20th century. Do one at a time. So if you click on tools, then any time, and pick 19th century and then 20th century. Is that confusing? Okay, let's go to the next page. So I found Musings of Mourne. They have a really neat feature, which is you can search in this book. Now Google Books, you probably know that when they scan, Google scans in books, and they have scanned books available to search. You can do word searches, but it is a type of machine-readable type. It's like the computer. There's a program that can identify the letters that were scanned. Sometimes that program is kind of funky. It has some glitches, and it doesn't exactly show what you're expecting it to show. But in any case, it's a great feature to search inside the book. Now, let's go back to my search for Junius L. Hempstead. Inside this book, I searched for Junius L. Hempstead, and there were 6 results. So you can click on any one of these and see what shows up. So the purpose for me showing you this is search inside a book that shows up, or a magazine article, or a newspaper article that shows up on Google Books. You can search inside it. That could be very fruitful. Or you might find, I didn't find anything useful, and just check it off your list and go on to the next. Look for the next possibility on Google Books. Now, specifically, Google Books can help. This is why it can be so good. It can help you find county histories, biographical sketches, state histories, regimental histories, local histories, government offices held by your ancestors, schools attended, residences, lawsuits. There's a great potential here that you might possibly find some scrap of information, some detail, that by itself it might not mean much. But if you add it to the other details that you have been documenting, can start to give you clues about who was this guy, this ancestor of mine. What was his story? Do you have any questions or comments so far at this point? Now, this is just about the potential of Google Books, but then you have to actually do the digging. I want to give you an example of a search that, my experience with my great-great-grandfather, Wesley Phillips. Typed in Wesley Phillips up in the upper left-hand corner. History of White County, Illinois, together with sketches. Well, that's good. Lo and behold, apparently he submitted this. He wrote about himself in the history of White County. He lived in White County. This was really good for me. Really good. The man himself or his wife submitted it. Good stuff. There's a different document from Rush Medical College. It showed up. He graduated in the class of 1862 to 1863 during the war. I don't have a copy of this here, but there's another document through Google Books, another book, that had the list of the research projects of the doctors in that class. It showed what my great-great-grandfather was studying as he was earning his medical degree, his special project. So, now we're going to get down into the weeds about Google Books. These are my best suggestions for using Google Books. First, we've already talked about this. Use quotation marks around each separate piece of information. For example, when I would search for Iowa Confederates, I would have Iowa, quotation mark, Confederates, quotation mark, quotation mark. Or if I wanted to see, were there any Confederates from Greene County, I would type Iowa, quotation mark, Iowa, quotation mark, Greene County, quotation mark, end quotation mark, Confederate, quotation mark, end quotation mark. Now, when it comes to names, try John D. Smith or J.D. Smith. Or if you know the guy's middle name, John David Smith. Try different variations of this. Or if you heard that, everybody called him Johnny. He even called himself Johnny. That's what he enlisted under. Type in Johnny D. Smith. What do you have to lose? Then you could reverse the order. Let's say you type in quotation mark, J.D. Smith, end quotation mark, and quotation mark, Chicago, end quotation mark. You're not getting anything useful. Reverse the order. You could try quotation mark, Chicago, end quotation mark, and quotation mark, J.D. Smith, end quotation mark. Reversing order. This is part of being persistent. Just because it makes sense to us doesn't mean that it makes sense to the programmers of Google Books. So it's a good tool, but you have to try different ways to get in there and get at the information. Does that make sense? Lastly, experiment with different qualifiers. For example, you could type in Confederates with quotation mark, or type in rebels, or traitors. Or you could type in disloyal. When you do enough reading, you will discover in your reading of newspapers and letters and histories and county histories, you'll discover that there were certain hot phrases that were used to discuss either praiseworthy terms or terms that were very critical of people. You'll discover those. You'll know which qualifiers to use. It will give you some good idea, okay? You'll learn. Any questions so far? Should we move on? Okay. We're almost done. Last suggestion. And by the way, before we talk about this, I probably should have mentioned this up front, but I'll say it now. Any of the suggestions that I'm making, I do not mean to talk down to any of you. Some of you have probably done research far longer than I have and are very skilled at this. You know things that I have no clue about. Okay? So please consider what I'm doing is just trying to share my best suggestions and with best wishes for your own searches. So the last suggestion is this. Please cite your sources. You might thank yourself later if you do this. Because let's say that you find a really juicy, rich source. It's like, all right, this helps me tell my great-great-grandfather's story. But what if you write it down and one of your own grandkids or cousin says, well, where'd you find it? I don't know. How do you know it's real? How do you know it's solid? Good question. So I would suggest you copy and paste all web pages and addresses, the URLs, the location at the top of the screen when you're using the internet. And lastly, I even suggest that you name all of the files and pictures that you have on your laptop or your desktop. You name them and be consistent with how you name all files and pictures. I have been very fortunate. I'm married to a former math teacher, a veteran math teacher. She actually designed an access database for me. I have hundreds of sources for these 76 guys, hundreds. And I have lots of transcriptions on there and lots of locations. And I have so many digital copies of documents on my laptop, I just had to start reading them out. But she recommended, here's how you should document, how you should name these files so you can find them later on. Great tips. Because what good is information if you can't find it later? And so, you've been very patient listening to a flood of information. The floor is open to your questions or comments.
I'll make a comment
Sir.
on Ancestry.com. I think people just want to get something published and they can care less whether or not it's right or wrong. Because I have been on there looking, and of course I'm a direct descendant. So I know the facts. that's not what gets put on.
Yeah. Thank you, good point.
I was going to say, this morning, Family Search tells me that I had a pioneer in my family. And I looked, because I didn't recognize the name, I looked to see how she fit into my life.
Yeah.
And you've got to watch Family Search also, because they dropped an entire generation out of my group.
Okay.
They skipped back,
Oh, wow.
they skipped the whole family line, you know,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah,
I mean, she's still going to be related to me, but a little farther off.
yeah, yeah. Isn't it interesting, have you noticed this, that sometimes when you identified an ancestor that came from a certain county in Pennsylvania, for example, lo and behold, there can be somebody else roughly the same age with the same doggone name from the same county. Have you ever seen that? And that leads, I suspect, to some rabbit trails. It's like, oh, well, this is great. Oh, well, maybe it's not great.
All of our families use the same name 800 times.
Yes, 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 that's getting real. It might be a little more common than you might think. Yeah. Yes, I don't think it's terribly uncommon. Now, even especially if any of your ancestors had family in a border state, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, then that, I would say, would not be uncommon at all. But in the case of Iowa, now Iowa was bordering the border state of Missouri. Confederates from Iowa, out of 76 of them, roughly one quarter had a divided family. So 1/4 of them had either a brother or a son that served in the Union Army. And you can just imagine, if they all survived the war, what would the Sunday dinner conversations have been like? Everybody wants to be civil, you know, and let's get along. And sometimes families, it was a challenge. Do we reconcile? How do we do that? Or not? And some did. Some did reconcile. Yes?
I think we should also remember how to add and subtract, because so many of the things that you find, people have not added and subtracted. They may have children that were born when they were much older, or way before they were born, and
Yes.
pay attention to the years. And
That's a great suggestion, great comment, thank you. Would it be too crazy to suggest that as you're doing research, that you let someone else look at it and say, can you check this out with me? Can you check this out? Am I on the right track? Am I overlooking something? Because sometimes having a fresh set of eyes can be helpful. There were, in the course of my own research, I don't have any Confederate ancestors. So essentially, I was almost doing research for other people's family histories. I mean, it was serving my own purposes, but that's kind of how it turned out. And there was one guy that I established that he was an Iowa Confederate from Dubuque. He returned to Virginia. His father gave him a slave during the war. And lots of documentation on this guy. Well, I was able to find a descendant of his. And the descendant's father contacted me and said, you said that this ancestor was a slave owner. The younger generation, they don't want to believe that. They're not too happy about that. And I said, well, here's the documentation. And it was absolutely watertight. Even the slave himself, later on, wrote a letter to Confederate Veteran magazine saying, yeah, I was given to this guy by his dad, and so forth. It was absolutely watertight. And, you know, I'm just more concerned about accuracy than, I mean, I just want it to be accurate, and then people can decide what to do with with what the documentation says. I know that some of these things can be problematic, but yes.
It may be more a matter of family genealogical research, but my family name was spelled differently about 2 generations ago. So if you were looking under the B-A-R-D-O-L-E part, you wouldn't find it B-A-R-D-A-H-L.
Yes, yes, and that reminds me, sometimes copyists and clerks working for the Confederate Army, the Union Army, they misspell things. And to get even murkier, sometimes guys went into service using a nickname. That's what's recorded, a nickname. So, yeah, the trail can get kind of murky for us looking back. Anybody else? Sir?
Union soldiers that end up in Confederate prisons,
Yeah.
all returned home. Have there been any records of any of that from the Confederate prisons that you knew of?
I didn't look at that. I was looking at Confederates who were captured by the Union Army.
Vice versa, though.
There might be. There might be. Now, it's not a guarantee, but the guys who survived those prison experiences, some of them, they wrote about it. They wrote articles. They wrote letters. Letters to editors. There might be some records of that down in the South, or records of that could be really tricky to find.
I'm too old.
Or what if somebody? So it's possible. But you're asking a good question. That's a great question. By the way, I encourage you, if you're curious about an aspect, I wonder if he did this. I wonder if this source might have the information. Follow your curiosity. Go ahead. It might take you down a trail that could be fruitful.
I know the roadblocks are, though.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of them.
Yes. So, my experience has been being persistent is helpful. Yes.
Yeah, I was the son of a Union veteran of the Civil War. One of my passions was going to cemeteries and identifying veterans. And 20 years ago, they used to have the Soldiers and Sailors website.
Yeah.
And that's what we used to use to be able to get headstones, and that was the thing. And then about 10 years later, they go, no, that's not how it's correct, so you can't use that anymore. But now we're talking about misspellings at the beginning, but you can find some of the paperwork, and then you go to the cemetery and you see that headstone, and the headstone is spelled differently too. So
Yes.
good thing to be aware of.
Good point.
At that point too. So.
Good point. By the way, one of the attendees before I spoke, shared with me that in the Jefferson Public Library there are 5 volumes on the reference shelf of the roster and record of Iowa soldiers in the War of the Rebellion. By the way, if you had a Union veteran ancestor who fought with an Iowa unit, and if you really wanted to dig deep, here's something I found. At the State Historical Archives, the State Historical Museum in Des Moines, in the archives, there were governors to letters to the governor, governor's papers. There were 2 governors of Iowa during the Civil War, and there are essentially regimental histories of Iowa regiments during the Civil War. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. Not only is there, in many cases, a description of here's where our regiment served, but there can be letters written by and written about members of that regiment. So, for example, I had read on Google Books, I read that, oh, there was this one Iowa soldier who, at the Battle of Shiloh, he was a Confederate soldier. He was captured, and 2 days later, he enlisted in the Union Army. Wow, this is great. This is great. So, or maybe it was vice versa. In any case, I went to Des Moines. I went to the regimental papers, and I looked, and I read all the letters in this box. And I found out, you know what? They didn't substantiate that. They got that wrong. The letters, the testimony shows it's not correct. But it could have been correct. But again, I never wanted to be embarrassed by me writing a book and saying, and someone saying, how do you know that's right? I don't think that's right. You know, you can't prove it. I never wanted to be in that position. So I've been a stickler for documentation, tight reasoning that is unassailable. That's what I think my goal has been. I'm not perfect, but I try really hard for that. Did I address I gave you much more than you started with, but sorry if I talked on too long about that little topic. But there are some fine resources at the State Historical Archives too, if you want to dig deep. If you do, and you might not. Yes?
When you talk about the State Historical Building, they have all the Iowa census for all of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
We only have Greene County here.
Yeah.
We have the GAR records for Greene County and 2 or 3 other counties. But State Historical Library has all of Iowa.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place to do research.
And they've got
Newspapers from the whole state.
Yes, microfilm copies of newspapers from before and during and after the Civil War. The only exception that I'm aware of is for Dubuque. The Dubuque Herald and the Dubuque Times, the Republican and Democrat papers, and one other Dubuque paper during the Civil War, not there. You have to go to Loras College. Last I checked, at the Center for Dubuque History to go through these wonderful microfilms of these wonderful newspapers. Wonderful, but that's quite a drive.
Is that because they're not sharing?
Probably. I don't know. But it means people have to make the trek or make the pilgrimage to Loras, so to speak, if you want to just get to this really good stuff. Now, yes, thank you for mentioning that. At the Carnegie Stout Museum, Carnegie Stout Library in Dubuque, if you get a card, and they gave me a card, online you can check at least some of those articles online. I don't know if it's everything, but at least it's something. I remember, I ended up documenting 12 guys from Dubuque who left Dubuque and served the Confederacy. So it's a rich source, important source for me. And I actually spent 3 full days. I stayed at a Motel 6, 3 full days, 10 hours a day or something, just pounding through microfilms. Yeah. Anybody else? Hey, I want to thank you all for coming. By the way, if you wanted any advice about your particular search, if you'd like to send me an email, I'd be glad to give you a first thought that crosses my mind. But I wanted to thank you for your attention and your patience. I hope that there was something out of all this that you'll find useful. And by the way, one last word, if I may. I know I talked about this in the beginning. May I hold this up, please? If you're interested in a more thorough search, I have 3 pages of details of, if you really want to dig deep, things you can look for. And just check them off the list. Look for or this isn't interesting, cross that one out. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks for everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this, I've done a little research at the library, and like you said, once you get on one thing, pretty soon you're going 15 miles out maybe. Or you should be back over here. It's time consuming. Yeah.
They need to get to the library because they do have the ancestry.
Yeah, they have that ancestry.com at the library.
There's some fold 3 on it too.
Good. And I was told that, I mean, it's free, at this time it's free for patrons to use.
Yeah.
So I've
You
been,
have to be there and use their machine.
yeah, you can't do it from home.
That's right, that's right.
Thank you very much, thanks for coming. Have a good day.